the way, this is going to be void. So this is it. This is how you track the error. And you may find this redundant to create a method that is called exactly the same way, but the reason I do this is just in case I want to do more things in addition to just sending everything to App Center. Instead of simply calling the App Center, I may want to add something else in here. So it may not be the case, but just in case I ever need to do more things when tracking errors than sending it to App Center, I can add it in here instead of having to change that functionality wherever I'm calling this method. So you could indeed just call this method from, for example, the login page where we are throwing this exception. I am just choosing to create my own method in case I ever need something else inside of it. So let's do precisely that. In the login page, I have this exception being thrown. Normally, what you would do is have a try catch block. We try some block of code, and if something wrong happens, we catch an exception, like this. And indeed, we know that something is going to happen because we are throwing the exception ourselves, but normally you will have a method that maybe makes some requests to the internet or tries to do something. That may actually throw an exception. You may not be throwing it yourself, so this is what you would have, a try catch block. And from the catch, we're going to be using from the App Center helper the track error method. And of course, we will pass the exception object to it, just like this. Now, it is of course going to send everything to App Center through the track error method that we're also calling. So let's take a look at this. We know that this is going to be tracked when we click the login button inside of the login page. So let's run this on our simulator. And I'm going to be navigating first to the login page, clicking the login button, and see how is it that this was reported over to App Center. So I have here the application running, navigate over to the login page, click the login button, and apparently nothing is happening. The application is no longer crashing because we are catching the exception that made the application crash before. But since we're already catching that exception, we know that App Center should already track that exception. So let's navigate back to App Center. Again, so far I've only run the application on Android, so the iOS application should still be completely empty. But if I navigate to the Android one and navigate over to Diagnostics, I am now going to see a second error in here. And actually, suddenly this second thing appearing here, and finally I can show you that if a crash happens, it is automatically reported to App Center. So let me explain. The first time that I ran the application, you saw it crash twice. However, at the beginning, only one of those crashes appeared in here. And right now, for some reason, it took App Center a couple of minutes in here to load it. I see the second crash. This second crash happened from the click of the login button. And you can see how it was reported by itself. App Center is already going to see when the application crashes, actually crashes, closes suddenly for some type of error. And you can see how the report indeed says that it is the click of the login button, the one that caused this crash. There for a second it wasn't listed yet, but you can see how it indeed happened almost immediately after the first crash, 25 minutes ago. While the errors, the ones that I'm actually tracking, because the application didn't crash, the error was tracked, it just happened a few minutes ago. So, of course, this has the exact same information as the other crash that we had seen before. But if we navigate over to the errors, these are slightly different. These aren't crashes, these are exceptions that are happening. And again, these are going to be experienced differently by the users. The application is not going to close on them, rather maybe they saw an error that is happening. Maybe in some place of our application, we already knew that something wrong may happen, so we had that try catch block in place. but maybe we didn't know exactly what type of error was going to happen. And so right now we are going to be able to see a report of exactly what happened. Something that is already being tracked with the help of the track error method that we are now already calling from our application. Aside from that, things are going to be very similar. You see the amount of reports, the amount of affected users, the OSs, the devices. A report, a more detailed report in here, apparently it was sent twice from the same device, the same OS at the same time, and we can click on either of them to see a little bit more detail about it, and you indeed see something very similar. The network, the device, the operating system, country, language, and the stack trace. And we can even, of course, download this report. And just as we saw with crashes, inside of errors, we can also set these to be open, closed, or just to ignore them. So errors are going to be very similar to crashes. Now errors, because we know that they may happen, can have a little bit more information. So in the next lecture, we're going to learn how to add more information about these errors, so we understand a little bit more about the difference between those errors and those crashes. But before moving forward, I want to show you the Analytics tab. We haven't done anything with Analytics, but just as with Diagnostics, we can actually see some information already. Just as Diagnostics by itself, by just adding it from the onStart method as one of the App Center services that we were going to be using. So what I mean by that is just over here in the onStart, we are adding those two services, Analytics and Crashes. So as soon as we added these crashes, the application was suddenly already able to track crashes, just as we saw with this simulated crash that we had by throwing this exception. Just as that happened by itself, as soon as we added this Analytics service, we already have some functionality and some users being tracked. You can see the active users. Of course, I am the only user, just one device, so I only see one in here. But I also see the amount of sessions per user. For example, so far I've run the application 3 times. I also have already some information about the top devices. So far only an emulator has run the application, so I see emulator. Countries, languages, in this case the language that the application had in place, the active users per version, and all of this information is already happening by itself, by simply adding the Analytics service to our application when we called the start method right here from the onStart method inside of the app class. So we have started to explore App Center. We have found out that by itself App Center is already tracking crashes, and that if we know that something wrong may happen, we can track them as errors. We now know that by itself, Analytics is already grabbing some information about how our users are behaving, mainly how many sessions they are having, what devices they are using, and what languages they have set on their device. In the next lecture, we're going to send a bit more information about the errors with the help of this method, the track error method. Because as I mentioned, it not only receives the exception, but it can receive an array of strings. So that is going to be helpful. And of course, throughout the rest of this section, we're going to start tracking a little bit more about those events that the user may trigger inside of the application, so our Analytics tab starts to show a little bit more than just what we see right now. Starting in the next lecture, let's send more information to those errors that we're already seeing.